Good evening. Tonight, we are going to look past the headlines and the political theater to examine a specific, pivotal sequence of events that almost dismantled an empire. We often see the projection of absolute power. We see the images of Donald Trump utilizing the full weight of the federal apparatus, whether it's the deployment of armed immigration officers who look ready for a war zone or the unilateral levying of tariffs that shake the economy from inflation to unemployment numbers. We have seen reports of the administration seizing foreign leaders, like the president of Venezuela, bringing them to the U.S. for trial, and seizing national resources like oil to be routed through private offshore accounts in Qatar. These are displays of immense unchecked force, but if you peel back that layer of projected strength, there is a different story. It is a story of fragility. It is a story about how close Donald Trump came to a genuine, catastrophic financial collapse. While the world was watching the executive actions, a quiet war was being fought in a New York courtroom. A war that threatened to bankrupt the man who built his entire identity on wealth. Tonight, we are investigating the New York civil fraud judgment. We are going to break down exactly how a gavel strike by Judge Arthur Engoron nearly wiped out Donald Trump's liquidity, how the math of interest rates became a ticking time bomb, and how a last-minute intervention by an appeals court rewrote the ending of this saga. To understand the gravity of this, we first need to understand the initial ruling. The Trump Organization was accused of a systematic deception. The charge was that for years, the company had inflated the value of its assets, skyscrapers, golf courses, holdings, in order to secure better loan terms and insurance rates from banks. Essentially, the accusation was that the numbers on the paper did not match the reality of the market. Judge Engoron reviewed the evidence and agreed. He found that fraud had occurred. He ordered Donald Trump to pay what are called ill-gotten gains, money that was made specifically because of those inflated numbers. The base number for this judgment was approximately $364 million. Now, $364 million is a staggering figure on its own. But in the legal world, the initial number is rarely the final number. This is where we need to talk about pre-judgment interest. When a court decides you owe money for past actions, they often add interest to account for the time you held that money. In New York, that interest rate is substantial. When the interest was calculated and added to the pile, that $364 million ballooned. It climbed until the total obligation facing Donald Trump was roughly $500 million. Let's pause and really analyze that figure, $500 million. To the average person, or even the average millionaire, that number is abstract. It sounds like monopoly money. But for Donald Trump, this was a mathematical crisis. And this brings us to a critical financial concept that we need to explain: liquidity versus net worth. Donald Trump frequently claims a net worth in the billions, sometimes 10 billion, sometimes more. And he likely does own assets that total a massive sum. He owns towers in New York, clubs in Florida, and branding deals globally. But net worth is not cash. You cannot pay a court judgment with a skyscraper unless you sell it. Liquidity refers to the cash you have on hand right now, money in the bank that can be wired immediately. According to estimates from financial analysts like Forbes, Donald Trump's actual liquid assets, his cash pile, hovered somewhere between $400 million and $700 million. Do the math with me. If you have conservatively $400 million in the bank and a judge orders you to pay $500 million immediately, you are arguably insolvent. You are in the red. Even if you have $700 million, a $500 million hit wipes out nearly your entire safety net. It leaves you unable to run your business, pay your staff, or handle an emergency. This judgment wasn't just a fine, it was a mechanism that threatened to force the liquidation of the Trump empire. It could have forced the fire sale of iconic properties. And the pressure was getting worse every single hour. This judgment was accruing interest at a rate of over $110,000 per day. Think about that psychological pressure. Every morning Donald Trump woke up, he owed $110,000 more than he did when he went to sleep. Every week the debt grew by nearly $1 million. It was a snowball rolling down a hill, gaining size and speed, threatening to crush the financial foundation of the Trump Organization. Donald Trump was scrambling. His legal team was desperate to appeal. But the legal system has a catch. To stop the collection of the money, to stop the authorities from seizing bank accounts or putting liens on buildings, you usually have to post a bond. A bond is essentially a guarantee. You put the money in an escrow account to say, "I have the money, hold it while we argue the appeal." Originally, the bond requirement was the full amount. Donald Trump needed to come up with $500 million just to have the right to argue that he shouldn't have to pay $500 million. He didn't have it. Or, at the very least, he didn't have it without selling off the crown jewels of his real estate portfolio. The situation was dire. The Trump Organization was effectively paralyzed in New York. The walls were closing in. This was not political rhetoric. This was a balance sheet crisis. And then, the rescue happened. An appeals court intervened. They looked at the massive $500 million penalty and essentially hit the brakes. The appeals court ruled that the penalty amount was excessive under the Constitution. They decided that while the lower court had the right to penalize, the scale of this specific fine went too far. In a stunning reversal of fortune, the $500 million sword hanging over Donald Trump's head was removed. The court also lowered the bond requirement significantly, dropping it down to $175 million. Now, $175 million is still a fortune. It is a massive amount of capital to tie up. There is speculation that Donald Trump may have utilized cryptocurrency gains, sold smaller assets, or leveraged other business holdings to scrape this pile of cash together. But $175 million is survivable. $500 million was a potential death blow. Donald Trump celebrated this. He framed it as a total vindication, a victory against a system he claimed was rigged. He went from facing the abyss of bankruptcy to walking away with his assets intact. However, if we stop the story there, we are missing the most important nuance. We need to look at what the appeals court did not do. While they threw out the massive financial penalty, they affirmed the core finding. They upheld the ruling that fraud had been committed. This is a distinction that often gets lost in the noise of cable news, so let's be very precise. The court said, the penalty is too high, but the verdict is correct. Donald Trump avoided the financial ruin, but he did not escape the legal brand. Under the law, the finding remains that the Trump Organization inflated assets and issued false financial data. So, where does this leave us? What is the reality of the situation now that the dust has settled? We can boil this down to 4 critical takeaways that define Donald Trump's current standing. First, we have to acknowledge the near miss. This wasn't a standard legal battle. It was a survival event. Judge Engoron's judgment brought a former president to the brink of a liquidity crisis. It proved that the legal system has the power to threaten the very existence of his business operations. He survived because of an appellate ruling, but the vulnerability was exposed. The armor has a crack. Second, we have a clearer picture of the actual wealth involved here. For decades, the Trump brand has been synonymous with limitless resources. This case pulled back the curtain. If a $500 million judgment was enough to cause a panic and a scramble for cash, it confirms that the liquidity is finite. The estimates of $400 to $700 million in available cash seem accurate. This means that while Donald Trump is incredibly wealthy in property, he is cash constrained. He is distinct from the tech billionaires who can liquidate stock options in seconds. His wealth is heavy, slow-moving, and difficult to access in an emergency. Third, we have the permanent label. The financial penalty was wiped away, but the civil fraud finding is now a matter of historical and legal record. It is affirmed. Donald Trump operates the presidency and his businesses carrying the legal designation of someone who has been found liable for financial fraud. No amount of spinning the penalty reduction changes the underlying verdict. It is a permanent asterisk next to the business record. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, this saga reveals a deep dependency. Donald Trump's financial security is heavily reliant on the court system. He was saved not by his business acumen, but by a judicial ruling. If future courts are less favorable, if future judgments stick, the financial firewall could crumble. There are still other cases. There are judgments involving E. Jean Carroll. There are other legal battles winding their way through the system. If the courts stop ruling in his favor, if the penalties start to stack up again, the liquidity crisis could return. The narrative that Donald Trump is untouchable is false. He is protected currently by specific legal interpretations that went his way. But the math doesn't lie. The interest rates, the bond requirements, the difference between liquid cash and hard assets, these are the realities that almost brought the empire down. Donald Trump claimed victory because he didn't go bankrupt. But the system proved it could get close, very, very close, to taking it all. And in the world of high-stakes finance, that margin of error is everything. Thank you for watching.